next presenter, Erin Seeger. She's the manager or deputy director of emergency management for regional municipality Wood Buffalo. And she reviews issues, successes, and shortcomings in managing and mitigating the Fort McMurray ice jam flood in 2020. So please welcome Erin as policy on municipalities expert.
Well, good afternoon. I hope I can match some of the presentations I've been seeing today. It's been really inspiring and a lot of different topics that I've been talking about with my groups a lot over the past few months, kind of all tying into one day. I'm going to leave here emotionally exhausted and my brain full, but thank you for having me. My name is Erin Seeger, and I am the manager and deputy director for emergency management for the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, as you guys know, RMWB, Fort Mac. I moved to Fort McMurray in 2019, so I wasn't there during the fire. I was here in Edmonton, and I joined the emergency management branch in the quiet month of March of 2020. At the time, our focus was on the onset of the pandemic, and we were growing our staff to help take it on. We didn't know what was going to come of it, and you all were through that experience. It was scary. It was new. It was, all the speeches every day, the rules changing every day. It was busy, but we were also preparing for our annual river breakup. This is a risk that happens in Fort McMurray on an annual basis. Fort McMurray was built in a floodplain, the lower town site, because that's the Hudson's Bay Company was, and it's barging goods up to Alaska. So I've always lived in cities with large rivers, but I never really paid attention to what river breakup looked like in the spring or what impacts it has. And the potential for impact in Fort McMurray has become one of our major focuses. Today, I'm going to walk you through the last 3 years and give you a snapshot of what river breakup means in a community like ours and the lessons we've learned. This is where we're going to be humble and rough. Peter was going to be. So a little bit of background. RMWB is one of the largest municipalities in Canada. It's almost the size of Nova Scotia. So we are a specialized municipality in that our boundaries include Fort McMurray plus 7 other smaller communities and I think 13 Indigenous communities. We're 4.5 hours north of Edmonton by road. So we're kind of on an island. So if we need resources or assistance, it's going to take a little while to get there. Fort McMurray is the urban service area, not a city. It's actually a hamlet, which means I can't choose from any communities. It's one alert center. I have to send an alert to the entire region. But that's just a side note. We live in the boreal forest, and we're no strangers to wildfire. We have Conklin, Joliet, Anzac, Craigmore Lake, Fort Mackay, and Fort Chipewyan. And Fort Chipewyan is, of course, only accessible in the winter through Winter Road, and in summer, it's fly in, fly out by boat. Our emergency management team consists of our director of emergency management, who is also our regional fire chief. So he's the DAM, and myself, the deputy director or manager of emergency management, the MAM, and we have 3 advisors and a coordinator. We're very fortunate to have such a talented and robust staff. These emergencies do happen in Fort McMurray in the region, and our leadership sees the value in having a strong program. Our downtown or lower town site is located here at the confluence of the Athabasca and Clearwater rivers, with McDonald Island right there. And you can see with all the mouths of the rivers and the islands, the chances for an ice jam to form there. When that happens, typically the flow of the Athabasca will get caught up just beyond and actually backwash up the Clearwater River and then flowing into the lower town site. So this is our HRVA, Hazard Risk Vulnerability Assessment. We had this done in 2020. Statistically, it's not changed a lot. The pandemic is actually sitting down there in the green. Our highest risk factor is wildfire. We're in boreal forest. Forest needs fire to regenerate. It's part of nature. It's just when these hazards intersect with populations that it becomes a potential disaster. So you can see there's a little blue arrow beside it in the orange there, and that means it's increasing with climate change. Also in there, we have some other factors that are increased in risk with climate change and with wildfire. Since 2016, we've solved instability issues. There aren't roots in the ground holding the ground where it should be. We have other risks on here that are indicative of our region. With our industrial work that happens up there, we have risks of tailings dam spills. We have DG release. We have pipeline release. These are all things that we work with our industrial partners and exercise on an annual basis to make sure we're ready for any of these eventualities. Sitting in the yellow there, we have ice jam flooding. So it's rated as a major severity and a moderate likelihood. All right. So river breakup increases the risk of flooding in Fort McMurray when ice jams occur just past where the McDonald Island is there. Usually our region will see a dynamic breakup, and this is why we don't use a machine like an Amphibex. It's just flowing too fast for us to put humans out on the ice, not worth the risk. When the rivers begin to break apart, the ice that breaks will run into intact ice downstream, and if it continues to break, it will create a ice run, and it's a dynamic, loud event that people will gather on the shores to watch, which creates its own hazard. But when the downstream ice is too solid and it doesn't break, it creates an ice jam, which creates this flood. I have a video here, if you can click on it. There's a little link in the bottom right there. It's not our river, it's a much smaller river, but it shows what happens when an ice jam releases. All right, so this guy's, he talks a little bit, but he caught this by accident. Watch how high the water goes under the river as the ice jam releases and comes down. And watch the impact on the shore as the water just lifts up everything.
Holy smokes. Holy smokes. What in the world is this? Holy smokes.
Oh.
I've never seen this before.
And that's just a small.
Oh my gosh.
We can go back to the presentation. But it gives you an idea of what we see on an annual basis on a small scale. Ours is much bigger. Over the last 3 springs, we've seen 3 versions of river breakup, and we've learned and adapted our plan based on each of these. So, all right, let's get to the 2020 ice jam flood. It's been discussed in a number of emergency management symposiums and the like, but today I wanted to identify what we learned from it. It happened early on a Sunday morning. I'm going to touch on the communication from here. We don't have our radios manned where it's syndicated. So getting the news out to people who are being evacuated was difficult because the only way they knew was when we were banging on their doors. Our communications and engagement department did their best to get the news releases out and to get it on all the socials. But unless you were coming home from shift work or your neighbors called you, you didn't know what was happening until they were banging. Every year we do a pre-breakup communications campaign. We're letting people know, get their grab bags ready, be ready. This is a risk. But of course, we're focused on the pandemic that year. So maybe it wasn't as strong as it normally would have been. So we did our best. We tried to get an AEA out, but it only went to people who had the app. It wasn't an intrusive port. And so we learned a little bit from that as well. Since then, this year, Alberta emergency alerts have moved to the national public alerting system. They had their first test a couple of weeks ago, which I think we all got about 7 messages. But growing pains, right? Happiness is moving forward, and we're working hard to use that tool in a more efficient way. Eventually, we evacuated over 13,500 people. So, during the incident, we identified wet zones and dry zones. So the wet zones were flooded. Dry zones were the rest of the lower town site. As you can see, the evacuation areas on the top right here. They've lost power. There might have been some sewer backups, and we needed those spaces for egress and perimeters. So as the evacuation grew, we went through voluntary evacuations and mandatory evacuations, and that created its whole little storm in itself. Because once we started calling voluntary evacuations, people were calling our pulse line, which is our municipal citizen concern line. And are we evacuated? Aren't we? What do we do? And one side of the street's evacuated, not the other. And we've since gone with best practices of using the terms of evacuation alert, letting people know you might be evacuated, get ready, or self-evacuate now. And evacuation order, get out now. And if you don't, we might not be able to help you down the road. We'll do our best. This piecemeal approach created so much confusion, and since then we've redesigned our evacuation zones to match what those wet and dry zones were, and to also work with commercial versus residential areas in egress. We've actually pre-written what the evacuation notices look like for each of these areas. So that's that pre-writing of comms that we were talking about. Our regional emergency plan is an overarching all hazards plan, and it actually has 13 smaller community emergency plans because of the nature of our municipality, having so many smaller communities within it, each of them with their own top 3 hazards. For example, Fort McKay has industrial air quality and forest fire, and I can't remember what else, but whereas Anzac might have train derailment, forest fire, and industrial. So it was the pandemic. So we were making plans of what to do to register people. Normally we would send people to a registration or reception center to register for supports. We're like, well, we can't do that in a pandemic. So what are we going to do? So we designed a drive-through model. Oops, this didn't change. I went the wrong way. What's happened? A drive-through model, which was thought out, but we weren't expecting 13,000 people. And so it backed up. And it was hours and hours of waiting for the people in their cars. We were also receiving busloads of people who couldn't self-evacuate, and we needed to worry about social distancing these people. And we also needed to figure out what to do with people who were symptomatic. So at the time that the flood happened, we had 15 positive cases identified in Fort McMurray of COVID-19. So it wasn't bad, but we didn't know how deadly it was. We didn't have enough N95s, and we actually had to get an exemption from the chief medical officer and help to be able to gather in our regional emergency coordination center. We had to wear masks in there, and I don't know if you guys remember what it was like. It was hard. Those masks were hard to wear in the beginning. We're used to it now, but at the time it was very difficult. And as soon as someone walked into their sleep, we're like, you up, and it became a personnel issue. So we also learned that we had to spread out in Fire Hall 5. Now, those of you who have been up there, and I know a lot of you helped out during the fires and some of you in the floods as well. It's Fire Hall 5 is a big, beautiful facility. We were able to spread out. Training ground wasn't quite open yet, but we now know where we're going to put the communication zone if we need to expand, and the logistics and finance folks can go into another boardroom, keeping their section chiefs with us. We figured out some things. Our flood plan called for group lodging of evacuees. That wasn't going to work either. So leading up to the flood, we worked with our local economic and tourism group. I think some of you know the guy who leads it, Kevin Whitelink. And we worked with them going, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to best use our hotel rooms in the region, and how are we going to manage this? And so we started working with the Hotel and Lodging Association at Fort McMurray to help identify where there were vacancies, what are they going to charge us, and what does this process look like? So we started the conversation before the flood happened, but it wasn't ironed out. Since then, we've actually created MOUs with most of the hotels, and we've got the Economic Development and Tourism Organization assigned us an accommodations advisor, someone who will go in the back end without breaking competition rules and assign rooms for us to use for the pandemic under prearranged emergency rates. We've actually trained front desk staff of hotels how to intake evacuees and not to intake people who have self-evacuated without reporting to the registration center. And there's binders on how to do this and worrying about the feeding and all those other emergency social services factors. Communications, this was tricky too. So we were holding town halls, virtual town halls, and Facebook Live events quite frequently. But it was really hard to keep the concerns of COVID-19 separate from the flood. And so we had to have experts on both things in these rooms. And there were a lot of them. Mayor and council were extremely concerned about both topics. So anytime our director of emergency management was doing these communication scrums, he wasn't in the incident command post, and that was a problem. We've since gone to using the deputy position in every activation to make sure that if he needs to go out and deal with political issues, we've got someone in the room who's as capable to continue on with the objectives that have been established. We also had a liaison list for COVID established of over 300 stakeholders, and we were emailing them directly the updated changes in the region what rules exist right now. Like, I don't know about you guys, but we never knew what the rule was going to be. So we were watching the premier's speeches, the prime minister's speeches. We were listening to Dr. Hinshaw. We were like, what are the rules? What are we supposed to do? And helping be that voice of trusted knowledge to help our citizens know what to do. So we then use this same distribution list to distribute flood updates to all our stakeholders. And this includes essential services like banks, and grocery stores, and schools and the like. We're like, what are we supposed to do? We don't know. So we started sending flood updates to these people as well. And then our subscription list grew from 300 to almost 500. So the next few years, we've continued using this list to send updates out. But as people got notification fatigue, they said, take me off the list, take me off the list. So we've now moved to a subscription model on our webpage where people can subscribe to pages about the risks that we're experiencing and get updates anytime that page is changed. So if you don't want to know what's going on, you don't have to know. If you want to know every time something changes, you can get 10 text messages or emails a day, depending on what people select when they sign up for subscription. Wrong way again. There we go. So just prior to the flood, we had done extensive renovations of our emergency coordination center. The tech wasn't working quite the way it should, and we were just starting to try and do things virtually. I truly believe the pandemic did for emergency management what postal strikes did for online bill payments. We had to learn to work online. We had to learn to work virtually. We had to learn to turn our home offices into functioning offices. Since the flood, we've got everything up and running pretty smooth. We're very proud of it. We have 17 screens, an in-room camera. We've got microphones. We've got all the charts and forms. We've got everything we could possibly need in there. And like I said, with the social distancing, we learned to spread out through all of Firewall 5. We also now do most of our ICS training right in the RECC rather than boardrooms to get people comfortable with interacting in there. And this goes to that human factor. You step into an EOC, you're like, okay, it's happening. What do we do? And if once you're used to training in there, you get a little more comfortable with being in there. Okay, no, we know how to do this. We can do this. So the registration of evacuees, we didn't have to do it with paper. We talked about going online. We didn't get there in time for the flood. And it was a mess. It was illegible. It was missing pieces. And it was just way more people than we had anticipated needing to evacuate. We needed to use our friends at the former Métis to input data from these paper forms to help us get a hold on who all we were providing supports for. And it took a few days. So since 2020, the province has launched the My Alberta Emergency Registration System. So any of us today, as part of our personal resiliency, can sign up and register yourselves, including your personal information, your family roster, any pet information, and it lives up in their cloud. And I'm told it's not connected to your taxes, and it's not connected to any other parking tickets, that type of thing. And then as a municipality, when we're having an emergency, we let them know and we activate the RRCP. I know, acronym soup, but the Registration and Reception Center program, and it will download that information. So our emergency social services volunteers only have to verify information, not input it from scratch. And that's very, very helpful. So during the 2020 event, we had a list of over 350 emergency social services volunteers, which is incredible. But when it came time to do the call out, we had less than 40 show up. Many had left the region, and others just weren't able to help anymore, whether they had an injury or whatever. So we've actually gotten quite a bit stricter on who is on our emergency social services list. If they don't participate in the training and the meetings on a regular basis, at least touch base, they're off the list. We need to know who we have ready to respond. We now have a list of active volunteers of over 165. And that's volunteers as well as municipal employees, some of whom now have emergency social services on their job descriptions. So we're pretty proud of that. We actually use a call-out system for them using an auto dialer called Mirror 3, which will send them texts and emails. And from there, we've set up an MOU with Fuse Social, which is a local social profit or charity group, we call it. And they have a webpage called Wood Buffalo Volunteers. And this is where citizens can sign up to help with any public event, whether it's bingo with seniors or helping out with a charity ball. There's a background page where people need to log in to sign in and sign up for roles within ESS and shifts. So we know if we have enough people during an emergency. And they're the qualified people that can sign up for these shifts. If we find out we don't have enough people for the roles we need to fill, we can then open it to the public and manage our walk-in volunteers this way through this website. So if someone walks in the ESS, I'm here to help, I want to help. We're like, okay, good. Please go back to your car and go to Wood Buffalo Volunteers, sign up for a shift and a role. And they're going to be roles that are appropriate for people with no training. Anyone can pour coffee and hand them a blanket. And then at least we've got a good record of who they are and who's helping us. So that's actually been a really good thing as well. The Mirror 3 software we also use for our call outs for our incident management team. We have worked on a better drive-through model as well, so it doesn't take hours and hours to get registered. So as you can see here, we've set up kind of a border crossing drive-through. So this happens at our new training center now. We have a giant parking lot that we use for training firefighters and a really neat tower that we can light on fire. But we can set it up within a couple hours, and we have ushers that help people go to whichever lane is going to get them the supports they need. We've also developed QR codes on the badges of the ushers so people can get pre-registered on mares as they're waiting to get to the front of the line, helping expedite the whole process. In 2021, we were so ready. We started talking about permanent mitigation. We did a whole bunch of, spent a lot of money on temporary mitigation. And we installed triple dams, we did muscle walls, we had sandbag programs, and we had sandbag programs for residents. We did a 2-day rehearsal of concept exercise, virtually, of course, with over 200 participants. It wasn't actually a very safe space to rehearse. We're doing our mail outs, we were doing our daily updates. People were anxious because they just lost everything the year before. And then they were also upset about the ugliness of this. So there was a lot of things going on. We actually even did pre-recorded little video clips, which were interrupting people's video games and YouTube videos. And they were annoyed with that as well, but they knew to be ready. So 2021, we had a rare for Fort McMurray thermal breakup. Over a month of watching the ice melt, like watching paint dry. We were giving these daily updates with no changes. And people were like, okay, come on. At one point, a radio station declared the river broken and we hadn't. And we had to get them to retract it. It's because there was one small ice jam downstream that could still potentially cause some minor flooding. And we just cannot call river breakup declared until there's no risk of that. We have a great partnership with Alberta Environment and Protected Areas. The river forecasters come up to our region when everything starts to move in Athabasca. So typically about a week to 2 weeks ahead of river breakup. And then they come and they'll fly the river every day and they'll look for ice jams, they'll look for risks in the areas and try and help us understand where our risk level is at. They don't predict anything. It's really hard to predict an ice jam. You just don't know if and where it's going to get caught. So this is this year's map of mitigation. So all along the rivers here is Prairie Loop Boulevard or Clearwater Drive, depending on who lives in Fort McMurray, what it's called. And it was originally built to a 1 in 50 year flood level. It was meant as a berm. And areas of it are as high as 250 meters, but other areas weren't. So we have now built up those berms in almost all reaches, they're calling them, to protect to a level of 250 meters. There are areas in critical infrastructure that we continue to protect with temporary mitigation every year. There's a few, there's some apartment buildings here that are just outside of the mitigation. And every year we have to do our best to protect them and provide access for them to the downtown. We're not trapping them in their building. And so we don't fill that last bit of mitigation until right before we expect river breakup to happen. So there's still risk. We actually have to hire security because of man-made risks of someone walking by and stabbing those triple downs with a knife. They're pretty robust, but there is a risk of failure. So we now rehearse what happens if mitigation fails. 250 meters is a 1 in 200 year level. The Clearwater River crested at 248.8 meters in 2020. So 2022 was a typical dynamic breakup. It happened within a week. It happened fast. We were in a rebuild phase. It was endemic. We did a 1-day rehearsal concept instead of 2, and we tried to do hybrid of both virtual and in person. And we learned some lessons from that. What we've definitely learned about these virtual situational awareness and programs for a remote EOC is that if you can't get your incident management team to participate in the software, it's not going to work. And these people don't do emergency management every day like those of us who do it as a career. They're accountants, they're engineers. And so they have to be able to come in and be able to jump into software, and they're not going to do hours and hours of training on it just in case. So we've come up with some pretty good SharePoint solutions that are working for now, but we're definitely always watching what our neighbors are doing and learning from them as well. This year, we've actually gone to smaller section-specific exercises. We started with command and establishing objectives. And then we went into the operations section. They had their own exercise where they went in and tried to integrate what are we going to do with these objectives. Then we went to planning, and they had to do, okay, if this doesn't work, then what? And they were doing the resources, they were doing the demo, they were doing the documentation. And then we went to logistics, and they had to actually get the 213s that had been filled out by planning the day before. And okay, we're going to order this stuff, where are we going to order it from? And finances on Monday, and then we're doing the communication, safety, and liaison next Thursday. So it's a more drawn out exercise, and we've actually had stakeholders going, where's the big rehearsal concept? Like, we might do it again next year, but for this year, getting into the weeds a bit has been really excellent in finding some gaps, just in the paperwork and what other supplies we can put ready to go in the RECC. We used our drone extensively in 2022. We sent it up there, and besides what the Rivers folks were giving us, we were getting live feed into the RECC. We also started paying more attention to downstream impacts in 2022. The Rivers folks hosted a meeting called the Peace Athabasca Delta to give them an idea of what's happening. So Fort McKay is fairly high above the river, so risk of flooding due to river breakup isn't really there. And Fort Chipewyan is on Lake Athabasca, so there'd have to be some pretty serious impacts for river breakup to impact them. However, there's a lot of trappers along the way, and keeping them informed is something that's become a concern, and just making sure Indigenous communities are aware of ongoing risks as the Athabasca breaks. Wrong way again. All right. One other big change we've made is we've really improved our evacuation program. One of the biggest complaints that we got from our friends in RCMP and bylaw is they didn't always know which streets had always been done. And they get sent out going, just get the people out, get them out now. And they've got no information to tell them on where to go and what's going on. And so the responders themselves don't always know what's going on. So we developed these big, bright yellow evacuation stickies, and we can slap them on the doors of the houses as they've been cleared. So yet the people here are either not home or we've talked to them. We also have the QR codes and business cards. So as people are getting out of Dodge, they can scan the code. Quick fun fact, do you know what QR stands for? Quick response. So we open up a back web page that's not, for panic reasons, not available on a daily basis, and that we can update it instantaneously when information changes on where we want to send people. So we might be evacuating before we know where our registration center is, but at least we can update it really quickly. And this also allows our door knockers to know how the situation is escalating. So any information that we want people to know, and as it changes, can send them to that web page, and then they can then subscribe for updates. Our RCMP and bylaw officers are calling this a game changer. They're really excited about it, but they really hope they don't have to use it. And I would be doing my community a disservice if I didn't speak to our resiliency. We have proven over and over again that we can pull together and get through these disasters. And the phrase Fort Mac Strong means a lot to us. Experience has shown us that investment into response, Mother Nature's going to do what she's going to do. The money is better spent in mitigation and planning. And for every dollar we spend in mitigation, I think it was Sarah that said you're gonna get 15 back. As a personal takeaway, we're asking our people to be more resilient with their go bags and preparing for the river breakup, getting things out of the basement. But yes, we know a lot of people live in basements in Fort McMurray. Look out for each other. Know who your neighbors are. Be ready to consolidate resources. We've developed a vulnerable persons registry. So it's voluntary, free, and confidential. It's a registry of people who may need help evacuating, whether it's for mobility reasons, mental health reasons, elderly. They have to qualify to be on it, but once they're accepted, they will get a full emergency preparedness session and a kit, and they'll be explained fully how the evacuation process would work. So if someone has maybe sight difficulty, we're going to send a bus to come pick you up and we will assist you out. This way, nobody gets left behind. We have actually over 170 registrants on the VPR now. It touches every community within our municipality. In 2021, we won a Minister's Award for Municipal Excellence in Enhancing Community Safety for this program. Our Fire Smart program is also state of the art, and the work we've done in Fire Smart, creating fire breaks, as well as having our wildland urban interface team going out, knocking on doors and helping people understand what they can do to better prepare their homes so that, trees, wood piles beside the house, these types of things, and creating fire breaks between homes and wild areas has gone a long way to making our region more resilient. I have a quick example. I know I'm speed talking right now. It's the coffee. But last fall, and one of the things with climate change is you're seeing longer fire seasons. Last fall, forestry was already setting up to close up shop and get out. We had a fire in Morgan Heights, which is one of our communities. But because of the fire smarting that had been done there, we actually had a space about the size of this room to be able to set up our traditional fire trucks and hoses and sprinklers to help keep the fire going away from homes. We still had a major smoke issue, but we were able to protect the homes because of the fire smarting that was done. We were also able to use our drone and infrared lighting to see where the fire was and where it was going. It was pretty neat to be able to use the drone for that. And I understand that your topic was drones last year. I missed it. My apologies. Adaptation is a form of resiliency. We heard someone else say that today. Our reality is that we live in the boreal forest and it requires fire for survival and renewal. Our rivers will always freeze and melt. There will always be a risk of flooding because we built there. How we prevent lost lives due to these events is all in the preparation plan. That concludes my presentation today. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions after this forum, please feel free to email me, add me on LinkedIn. My email address is on the screen here, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Very compelling presentation. Thank you.